something to point out is the speed that you can close your month and produce your numbers is indicative to how good your accounting policies and governance is. And what does that mean? Timely manner usually means within 2 weeks of the close of the month. That would be, generally accepted as a timely close. If it takes 2 months, there's going to be a lot of questions by buyers. So the way I think of it is it's like a lubricant in many ways. It lubricates the business operations to have that transparency. Hello and welcome to this week's Shoot the Moon podcast, broadcasting live and direct from Revenue Rocket World Headquarters in Bloomington, Minnesota. As you likely know, if you're listening to this podcast, Revenue Rocket is the world's premier M&A advisor to tech-enabled services firms. With me today are my partners, Matt Lockhart and Ryan Barnett. Welcome, guys.
Yeah, good to be here. We're on a run, guys. We're doing pretty good, which means that we're all on task and ready to go. And I don't know how many more do we have in this series, Ryan?
I got one more after this one. So this one and one more.
Nice. Well, I think, I've gotten feedback already on a couple that have been released that it's hitting the spot, if you will. So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, this is part of a mini series that we've been doing here. If you're new to the podcast, here at Revenue Rocket, we work 100% with tech-enabled services firms. And so if you're in the business of working with technology and providing services, we're right in the market for you. And we work a lot with founders who are making some big decisions about their business. Sometimes it's to go buy another business. Sometimes it's to sell their own business, or sometimes it's to kind of tune up the business for the future and perhaps a sale in the future. And one of the things we've found is that CEOs, especially when you're founder-led, can oftentimes build a company that really rests on the shoulders of the CEO alone. And when that comes to time for a transaction and you're looking to sell the firm, that becomes a huge amount of risk to any kind of buyer. And we wanted to take a look at, what does it mean for a CEO to be optional in running your firm? And granted, we don't think you're ever going to be replaced. But if we can think about what's important for a buyer to understand the right transition, we want to make sure that the right foundations are in place. So far, we've talked about just the traps of being a CEO in this situation. We've talked about having the right number two, and we've talked about kind of the general, what does it mean to move on from the business. Today, we're looking at a little bit of a niche within this, in that oftentimes CEOs also are the primary number keeper in the business, and they can even fit as a de facto CFO. And so we see in a lot of firms, the real financial picture just lives in the owner's head or in their inbox. And if you're looking at stepping away from a firm, that's something we gotta take a look at. So, Mike, I'd love for you to get us going, and think, why do CEOs run in this today, and what's the cost of that financial information kind of living only with the owner?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Good question. Well, the challenge becomes one, transparency to the team, two, lack of capacity. I mean, there's all kinds of issues that reside in, why it's not a great idea to have the CEO be the only one with their hands in the cash box, so to speak. But the cost, ultimately becomes one that, you miss strategic decisions that should be made preemptively in the business. By not, having a deep, frankly, understanding of financial strategy. Think of a role of a CFO. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, CEOs are not doing bookkeeping. Most firms have a bookkeeper, or maybe they contract with their accounting firm to do bookkeeping services, or a third party. But oftentimes they run financial strategy, and there's challenges with that. At a minimum, the CEO needs to have a sounding board, what we'll call CFO or contract CFO, to help them manage and interpret the data, the financials, the trend lines, the dashboards. And if you do that effectively, you're in a position to transition your CEO role in financial review to a third party, because you have someone who's focused on not only the bookkeeping strategies, but also the in closing the books, et cetera, but also the overall financial strategy should the CEO not be in the seat. Something to point out is the speed that you can close your month and produce your numbers is indicative to how good your accounting policies and governance is. And it's really important in the eyes and mind of a buyer that happens in a timely manner. And what does that mean? Timely manner usually means within 2 weeks of the close of the month. That would be, generally accepted as a timely close. If it takes 2 months, there's going to be a lot of questions by buyers as to, what's the story? Even if it's multi-currency, multi-country, it shouldn't be a delayed process or markedly delayed process. It's a test as to how mature your financial systems are, and certainly what a buyer will look for when it's time to acquire your business.
It's fascinating you say that, Mike, in that one of the things that we've actually seen on several introduction calls is sometimes the opposite too. Just a contrast here. If you don't know your numbers and you're talking to a buyer, that looks just as bad. And so sometimes that outsourcing can be too much. And I think a lot of times financial information doesn't necessarily make it down to that second line of resources. And it can get stuck in that owner's head or the accountant's head, which is even worse if a CEO doesn't demonstrate command of the business.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that. I think the CEO should always know, what's going on in the financials at the highest level, right? Revenue, profitability for any given period, they should know that off the top of their head. And beyond that, though, as it relates to financial strategy and managing cash flow and, understanding, what's going on with bookkeeping and the nuance of when invoices get sent, how they're collected, et cetera, that can be done by a financial team. CEO doesn't need to be in the weeds on any of that stuff, but they do need to know their numbers, and they do need to be able to report that to a third party, whether that's a bank or an investor or a potential buyer.
Right. And if I take that little step, oh yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, one thing as you guys were talking, as I was thinking about it, and from experience, right? It's really also about understanding the KPIs that then sort of build the results, if you will, within the business, and not just for the CEO to understand that, but really starting to push that out to the organization. And so it's like, well, if the CEO is doing too much, then naturally he's sort of not thinking about how does the organization react as the numbers come together on a month-by-month basis. So it's sort of it all just kind of builds upon itself.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And Matt, when you think about that visibility to the firm and what does good enough financial visibility look like for a firm that's between, let's say, $5 and $50 million in revenue for an IT services firm?
Yeah, well, I mean, we all understand that I think GAAP-based accounting is a goal for growing organizations. Now, does a $3 million organization need to adhere to, complete GAAP-based accounting rules? Well, maybe not, but you're in that $3 to $5 million range even. And oftentimes, companies that start out with cash-based accounting, right? It's the easiest thing to do. It allows firms to understand cash at hand, and it's just an ease of method for smaller businesses. Making that change to accrual-based accounting is, I think, a really key first step towards getting to a GAAP standard. So what are some of the key items within that? Obviously, clean and current balance sheets, right? That are mapped towards a clean, profit and loss statement, right? And the buildup underneath that is certainly a standard chart of accounts with breakdown between revenue lines. And so I think that some of those things are sort of at a minimum. And again, the preparation of the updates to the balance sheet and the P&L, obviously that's based upon you going into the year with a standard budget in place. And so you're able to map the actuals against your budget and the forecast that is in place. And then, a good practice, Mike, I know you do on a regular basis, and we've done in the past with other firms, is, reviewing those results on a monthly basis with your banking relationships, right? And they'll tell you if things don't look straight, and where you need to improve. Did I miss anything, Mike?
I think that covers it, Matt. I think, certainly there's the whole concept of chart of accounts and what's good enough. And, you want to make sure that I assume if you're getting to the point where you're exiting your business, that you have quote unquote clean books in the sense that, they're manageable and they're managed on a standard chart with sort of documented accounting policies, right? You can't just wing it on your accounting policies. I think it's important that they're documented. And to your point, regular review by outsiders, whether that be your bankers, which is probably the easiest one to do, and the one that they welcome that opportunity because not everyone does it, is a great way for to field some questions or to spot things that maybe you missed.
Well, and if we take this from this high level here that we're talking P&L balance sheet, to your point, cash or accrual based accounting, the highest numbers, some of that gets into, buyers are going to be really interested in that. If we think about a CEO who's in the place who's trying to get the rest of the team involved and really focused on the numbers, Mike, what kind of numbers do you start to put in front of the team that may be a little bit more nuanced compared to those headline numbers we just talked about?
Well, I think, it's important to show the levers that drive growth and profitability, right? So, things like utilization and realization, pretty important, right? If you're an IT services company, the team should be tracking that. And looking at, where are we against our plan for the year as it relates to growth targets and budget? How are we managing to budget for both revenue and profitability? And what levers might we pull to continue to scale that? Now, some owners want to show only gross margin. They don't want to go to net income, although I would say that, having full transparency with your numbers is a best practice, and because they're just numbers, right? And in the end, I think if people have visibility to that, they're in a better position to make changes to help optimize them. I think it's also an opportunity to educate your team on, how to read a P&L on a balance sheet. Not everyone may know how to do that. And I think being able to use it as a teaching opportunity to really raise your game inside of your team would be one that's super valuable and one that creates I think a lot of trust. But things like recurring revenue, you know how does that really work in your business? What is one-time revenue or repeat versus recurring revenue? And things that the market will value, right? In looking at your business are obviously important things to measure, and frankly, looking at how to measure that. One comment I wanted to make around utilization: we really think 80% against a 20/80 year is your utilization target. Realization is a little different if you're doing more fixed fee work, but again, you want to keep people busy, so you can either normalize it to utilization, and if you have questions about how to measure realization versus utilization, you can drop us a note at info@revenuerocket.com. Some of the wrong stuff to measure, though, are netting out PTO and training, of your utilization. You've got to really not do that, right? You've got to look at the full 20/80 year. A lot of companies fall into a trap of gaming utilization by saying, hey, we got to give everyone so many weeks off, and then we got to net out, this and that, next thing. And they convince themselves that they're really highly utilized when that's not the case. And so being able to be transparent about the available time to bill and then where you're billing and how you're utilizing those resources, I think is sort of really, really important. In addition to, as much transparency as you're comfortable with in the financials month after month.
Yeah, it's a great start there, Mike. And to your point, there's some high level metrics that are really critical to the business and how it operates. Matt, if I think about transferring the knowledge that a CEO, let's say, driving those numbers to a team that's trying to own those numbers, is there anything that a business owner can do to help transfer the ability to execute on influencing those numbers to the team that would make a transition easier?
Well, I think it's a follow-on from sort of what Mike was advocating for, which is the more that everyone understands how the levers add up to success, right? And the goals, that are set forth on a yearly basis, within the budget, right? So let's just use gross margin as an example, right? And for the sales team, first, the sales team and the delivery leaders within the business to, really know they wake up knowing it, they wake up thinking, okay, what is going to drive gross margin for every customer, within the business. And, this rings true for MSPs, for integrators, for, project-based firms. But sometimes we see that not everybody really understands, the impacts of decisions made, right? And you can say, well, geez, it should be pretty easy. What is my, what is my price and revenue flexibility and then, utilization expectations, within a contract, and then it should be relatively easy to understand. And, in some ways, yes. But, sometimes people just are confused by it. And when that's in place, well, then there can be bad decisions made about, the personnel, the level of personnel that are applied to work. Obviously bad decisions made regarding discounting, off of target pricing, and et cetera, or even or even, sort of contractual arrangements that have an impact on utilization, which then has an impact upon, individual gross margin contribution to the business. And so I just use that as one example. Now, take utilization on the other hand. Everybody within the business should understand the utilization targets, for the business, and how each individual within the delivery organization has an impact and what their individual goals are for utilization. So, that's a place to start, which, it's like everybody comes to work thinking and understanding that how they are positioning and managing expectations and selling, the results of that become the results of the financial performance, within the business.
Right, right. And if you think about some of those key metrics that the company really should know, and Mike, you've been an advocate for kind of showing some of those key metrics for that you keep and share along the team. Can you tell me, and you talked about this earlier too, and I just want to wrap this up around or just come back to it. What really is the link between those clean, visible numbers that a team understands and a firm's value and readiness to actually, go sell?
Well, the link has to do with, in my opinion, um, understand the full lay of the land, right? And again, if you're making yourself CEO optional or business CEO optional, you have to have a team that's pulling on the rope all together, in my opinion. And so, certainly, um, the net of it is um, you can avoid driving the firm off the cliff, if you will, by making bad investment timing or misforecast, or there's just a variety of things. That full visibility will help the team kind of pull the rope together, and I think that's a critical thing. It also gets you out of the way of every approval, right? So, and you don't want end of quarter surprises. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, to making sure that you're kind of delegating that knowledge, if you will, or showing transparently how the business is operating. So I think it's critical that way. It can also eliminate some leakage. It helps people, grow personally inside the firm and contribute in new and interesting ways. It helps them negotiate contracts with vendors. I mean, all of you have contracts with vendors that are doing things for you, and it certainly gives them visibility onto how and best to do that and when to do that in ways where they don't have to come to you at every decision. So I think the way I think of it is it's like a lubricant in many ways. It lubricates the business operations to have that transparency, and it gives people more responsibility as they're working within, quote unquote, their lane in the business or their part of the business. They can better understand how the work they're doing contributes to growth and profit.
Yep, that totally makes sense. And let's just last question here as we wrap up. Matt, I'll throw it to you, and you can throw it back over to Mike to help finish this out. But what kind of cadence should be looked at here, and how does an owner build a rhythm around the numbers without it becoming such a burden to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, and I'll offer, every couple of weeks you've got an opportunity to sort of review review the levers, if you will. I mean, you haven't closed the books every couple of weeks, but with good systems in place, you're able to track your utilization numbers as an example. And so in addition to that, every 2 weeks you should be, updating your pipeline. Pipeline cleanliness is in place, right? And so those two things can kind of go together. Certainly on a monthly basis for the key members within your team. And when I say key members, your sales organization, your delivery leaders, they're getting a pretty good fulsome view of the results from the past month. Again, reinforcing where you're at against the key levers. It's a great opportunity to celebrate success and keep momentum going. And then sort of to the entire organization, results against budgeted, goal performance within the business is, I think, a good thing to do. Sometimes our people feel like, well, geez, we missed on some things, and we don't want people to know that we missed in any way. Well, my experience is everybody knows anyways, right? Just by the attitude that people have, and loose lips, if you will. And so, I think that on a consistent basis, some performance measures on a bi-weekly basis, on a monthly basis, sort of a fulsome piece of the performance measures, and then how that results in the stated financials. And then again, on a quarterly basis, you're able to give everybody in the business a good picture of where you're at against plan. And in my experience, sometimes you are, above plan, and that is going to cause new updates to the business, maybe new investments and the like. And sometimes you haven't met plan, and that could result in decisions as well. But again, most importantly, it's about making sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody's activated. Mike?
Yep, I agree, Matt. I think that's absolutely the case. Super important that everyone's in alignment, and building the habit and growing the muscle really helps the business work. One other comment I would make is, forecasts are tough, right? Forecasting the future is hard. So, the more rigor you can get into analyzing your history and your forecasting methodology, and working through that transparent discussion with your team, as well as having transparency around the financials, goes a long way towards hitting those forecasts in the future. And that adds value to the business long term and short term with a buyer. And that confidence and that approach, as infused in the business, will really help go a long way to building value and helping you be CEO optional. Any other thoughts, Ryan?
I think we captured it all. Looking forward to our last section of next week as we walk through that CEO optional. And thanks for the time here, Mike and Matt, today, and appreciate the insights.
Great. So with that, we'll tie a ribbon on it for this week's Shoot the Moon podcast. I encourage you to tune in next time. As Ryan mentioned, we're covering the last episode in this masterclass and being CEO optional. And with that, make it a great week.